living.
Okay. My name is Tony Cicoria. I'm an orthopedic surgeon. Evening.
I'd like to do something different, and I would like you to introduce yourself
Okay.
and tell everyone what you do for a living.
Okay. My name is Tony Cicoria. I'm an orthopedic surgeon and have been so for 30 something years. I've lost track.
Now, what I would like you to talk about is the day you died.
Okay. You want me to start at the beginning of it?
Wherever you want to start from.
Okay. It was, I think it was August 24th, 1994. And I was at a family reunion where my wife's family had 4 or 5 different birthdays in August. And so everybody would get together for that day. And we were at a place called Sleepy Hollow Lake, which was an area in a city called Athens, which is right below Albany, New York. And we were at a pavilion next to a lake. And it started out as a beautiful day, and there were about 25 or 28 family members there. And I had been given the joyful task of running the barbecue. So I was outside and I was paying attention to cooking. I wasn't paying attention to the fact that an ugly storm was blowing up over the lake. And I got my brother-in-law to watch the grill, and I was going to go call my mom to check on her. And I walked around the front of the building, and the building is, I was outside, and it's kind of a cantilever building. The party's up on the second floor of it. And I walked around the front where the payphone was, and I called my mother, and I let the phone ring 6 or 7 times, and she didn't pick up. So I was going to hang up the phone, and I took the phone and I started to take it away from my face and to hang it up. And all of a sudden I heard this loud crack, and this huge flash of light came out of the phone and hit me in the face. And it just threw me back like a rag doll. And I remember every millisecond of what happened. And as I was flying backwards, suddenly I was moving forwards, and I was very confused. And I remember standing there, and I'm absolutely befuddled. I had no idea what had suddenly changed, because I saw the lightning. I knew I'd been hit, and I knew I'd been thrown backwards. But now I'm just standing there. And as I'm standing there, I'm looking at the phone, and the phone is dangling, and nothing's making sense. And then suddenly I hear my mother-in-law screaming, and she's coming down the stairs toward me, and I'm at the bottom of the stairs on the ground floor. And as she's coming down the stairs, I'm looking at her, and I'm noticing that she's not looking at me, and she's looking off to her left. And when she got to the bottom of the stairs, she immediately went to her left, and I turned to follow her. And I took 2 steps, and I was like, I'm confronted with my body on the ground. And the only thing that came to mind was, oh shit, I'm dead. And I mean, I was shocked, because I expected there to be something magical about passing over, right? Or some signal, but there was nothing. It was just, I was on one side of the veil 1 second, and the next second I was on the other side, and there was nothing that signified it. It was just somebody pulled the veil away, and I was there. And so I walked over to my body, and there was a lady waiting to use the phone, she and her daughter. And it turned out that she was a nurse, and she was waiting. Her daughter wanted to use the phone, and she was just chaperoning. and the young girl was 12 or 13, as I recall. And she started to get down to do CPR, and I was calling out to them, but nobody could hear me, but I could hear them and I could see them. And as I'm standing there and I'm thinking, okay, I mean, the first big realization that came to me at that moment was, oh my God, I'm who I am always. I'm still thinking the way I normally would. I am still reacting the way I normally would. And I still thought in the vernacular that I normally would think. And I thought, okay, so whatever is in that body is nothing. I mean, I'm who I am always, and my spirit is immortal, for lack of a better word. And as I was standing there, and I'm coming to this realization, and I also came to the realization, well, hell, there's nothing I can do here. And for some reason, I was drawn away, and I turned and started walking away, and I thought, well, I'm going to walk up the stairs to where my family is, and they were all up on the second floor. And as I started to go up the stairs, I'm looking down at the stairs because that's what I would normally do, so I don't trip and fall. And as I'm looking at my legs, I see my legs start to dissolve. And I thought, oh boy, this is getting interesting. And it just continued. By the time I got to the top of the stairs, I was just a ball of energy. I had no form. And the stairs turn and go to the left, and I didn't bother. I just went through the wall, and I passed over my wife, who was sitting on a chair, and she was painting children's faces. And I made note of where the kids were and what alignment and what they were doing. And as I passed over her, I went diagonally out of the building. And when I got out of the building was when things really started to get interesting, because it was suddenly like I had fallen into a river of pure positive energy. And it was amazing because it was so overwhelming. The only sensation in it was absolute love and peace. You you couldn't have anything else in that. And it was the most pure sensation I've ever felt. And I looked at it and I could see this bright whitish bluish white light. And everything was this color. And it had this sparkling quality to it, almost like it reminded me of when I was a kid and I was swimming underwater in a crystal clear stream and the light would be pouring through it. And it reminded me of that. But then as I stood there and I was in the flow of whatever this energy was, and as I looked at it, I could actually see the lines of the energy, and I could see it flowing almost like sine waves through everything. And it was a real strange sensation, but I was convinced at that moment that whatever this force is, this is what makes up everything in the universe that we know. And it was, for lack of a better word, I called this energy love, because that was the only thing that came from it. But it literally, you could see that it made up everything. And as I'm going, and I'm sitting in this flow of whatever it is, and I had the sensation that I was moving, that I had both speed and direction, but I had no idea where I was going or what was happening. And I had a brief life review, so to speak, of kind of a collage of pictures of high points and low points in my life, and that just passed. And then I was becoming ecstatic over the fact that wherever I was going, this was going to be incredible. and I was excited to go. And when I finally reached that point where I was ecstatic to be where I was, and was embracing the fact that I was going to go home, for lack of better words. And suddenly it was like somebody flipped a switch. Boom. I was back in my body. I was on the ground, and God, it hurt. And where the lightning hit me in the face and where it came out my foot, it just felt like somebody had stuck a hot poker in both of them and just left it there. And I remembered I was still unconscious at the time, and but I must have started to breathe because they had stopped CPR, and I could feel this person next to me, but I couldn't open my eyes yet, and it seemed like several minutes before I was able to open them, and then everything was fuzzy, and I didn't know what I was really confused at that point. And when I opened my eyes, I knew that this lady had saved my life, and I wanted to thank her. And I looked at her and I said, "It's okay, I'm a doctor." And and she just kind of laughed and said, "Well, you weren't a minute ago." And I said, and at that point I realized, okay, I'm just going to shut up because nothing good is going to come out of my mouth. And at that point, they let me recover, and the police came. They told me they were calling an ambulance, and I refused it. And I said, "There's no point in taking me to the hospital. I'm not going to sit there for hours. I know how it works." And and then they're going to say, "Yeah, well, you're alive. You can go home." And I'm like, "I'm going to do that anyway." So I got my family, and they took me home. And I called my cardiologist and my neurologist on the way, and told them what happened, and they were waiting for me when I got there. And then they went over everything, and they said, "Well, you're lucky." And I thought, okay, now what? And then I went home, and it took me about a week to start to think normally. It was pretty cloudy there for a few days, and I felt like an old piano, like an old television from the 60s that had bad tuners in them. And you'd always have to walk up and slap it on the side of the television to make it work right. And that's the way it felt. It's like, okay, somebody needs to walk up and hit me in the head and shake some of these cobwebs loose because I'm not working right. And then that disappeared. And I was really shaken by that, because now I was left with, what did that mean? I had this incredible experience, and I didn't understand it, and I didn't have anybody to talk to about it. And I was like, okay, well, let me just see what happens. And I went back to work, and within a couple of weeks of that, I started to have this incredible desire to hear classical piano music. And that was a big departure for me. I was a kid of the 60s, and you had rock and roll, and there really wasn't much else. But my mom had made me take piano lessons when I was a 7-year-old. She made me do it for a year, and I hated it, and I didn't want anything to do with it. So that was the end of that. And then as this happened, suddenly I want to hear classical piano, and I'm like, okay. But there was no place around that even had classical piano music. It wasn't something that was available in my little town. So I drove to Albany to get a music store that had classical piano, and I went in, and the CD seemed to just jump off the rack into my hands, and it was Vladimir Ashkenazy playing his favorite Chopin. So I got the CD and I listened to it nonstop, and I couldn't stop listening to it. and made everybody else listen to it. I took it to work and made them listen to it. And I think everybody was thinking, maybe he got a little more shocked than we realized. But all of a sudden, I came to the realization within a couple of weeks of that listening to it was not going to be enough. I had to be able to play it. And that was going to be a big problem since I didn't have a piano and I didn't know how to play. So, where do you go from there? But the next day, one of our babysitters came to the house and said, I'm going to be moving. I have an old upright piano. Could I store it in your house for a year? And I thought, okay, there's a God wink if I ever saw one. And suddenly I have a piano. So I went to the music store and I bought some music to train by, which is, learning the ABCs of music. And I bought some books to try to teach myself. And that's when I started. And within a couple of weeks of that, I was asleep and I had this incredible dream. And in the dream, it was like an out of body experience. And I remember walking out onto the stage and I'm walking toward myself. I'm actually out on the stage at a concert hall and I'm playing and I'm walking out and I'm going to walk up behind myself. And as I am approaching, I'm realizing that this is not somebody else's music. This is mine. And as I listen to it, I'm really listening to it intently. And the ending has this kind of a crashing loud ending and it woke me up. And it was about 3:15 in the morning and I got up and I went out to that old piano and I tried to plunk out some of the melody of what I had heard, but I had no idea how to write it down and I didn't know how to write any music. So I said the hell with it and I went back to bed. And I had to get up normally I would get up at 5:30, 6 o'clock, and I would go out and I would practice the piano that I was trying to teach myself. And then I went to work. So I went to work as normal. But one thing that changed from that moment on was that whenever I sat down at that piano, the music from the dream would start playing in my head. It was just like somebody had downloaded it in there and it wanted to be paid attention to. So whenever I sat down, and I sat down every day to try to teach myself, then the music would start to play. I would plunk out different notes, and by then I knew what the notes were, and I would write down in alphabetical form what it was because I didn't know how to write the notes. And I would just take the pieces of paper that I did it on and I threw it in a drawer, thinking someday I'll come back to this and I'll do something with it. But that happened every day, and I wound up having a big drawer full of little pieces of paper that all went to whatever this piece of music was. Then I kept working, trying to teach myself, and realized that was not possible. So I finally gave up and hired a teacher, and told her the story and what I was trying to do, and the music that was haunting me. And so she took me on as a student and helped form the basis for what was going to come down the road.
How long was that period of time after you had the dream until you hired your teacher? Do you know?
That was about 2 years that I tried to do it myself, and I actually wasn't smart enough to realize that I was doing myself harm until my daughter's best friend at the time, her mom came to pick her up, and her mother was an accomplished violinist, and I was trying to learn a Chopin piece called a Fantasy Impromptu, and the way it's written, it's in what's called a polyrhythm. So one hand is playing at a different rate than the other hand is, and it's written that way purposefully. And I didn't understand that, and I was trying to make them match up, and they don't. They're not supposed to. But and so I was murdering this piece of music, and she came into my room where the piano was, and she says, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm trying to learn this piece of music, but the hands don't line up." And she looked at me and said, "They're not supposed to. It's a polyrhythm." And I looked at her stupidly and I said, "What's a polyrhythm?" And she said, "I'm not even going to attempt to teach you that." She said, "It's time you get a teacher." So, she gave me the name of Sandy McCain, who was at the time was the chairman of music at Hartwick College. And she gave me her name and told me to call her, so I did. And she told me to bring some of the music in that I was trying to play and to work on, and she would consider whether or not she would take me on as a student. So I brought all this stuff in and I played it, and she said, "Well, I'd be glad to take you on as a student, but you are not allowed to play any of that music until I tell you you can." And I said, "Okay, I get it." And because I had no foundation to play those things, and she recognized it right away that, okay, you got to start the basics and build on it. And so that's what I did. And as I was going through all that process, the music was still playing in my head. And as I started to learn how to play and to read music, I started to be able to write some of it down. And so I kept working on that. And then I started going to a piano camp for adults called the Sonata in Bennington, Vermont, and met once a year. And I started going in 2002. In 2006, the owner's sister, um, Erica Vanderlyn Feidner is her name. She was the number one salesperson for Steinway, New York, and she left and went to Bosendorfer. And she brought all these Bosendorfer pianos into the piano camp for us to play with. And we got talking about all this stuff, and this was in 2006. And after we talked for hours, she said, "There's really only one person that can tell this story, and that's Oliver Sacks." And I said, "Okay." At the time, I didn't know who Oliver was, and had to go look him up. And he had written a book about Parkinson's and been one of the biggest. He had been the guy that solved the mystery of treating it, and he was in. They wrote a movie about him for that particular thing, which I'm blanking on at this second. At any rate, so she must have somehow she got hold of Oliver and talked to him and told him about this wacky guy in upstate New York that he needed to see as a patient. So I didn't hear anything more until August of 2006, and I get a phone call from Oliver Sacks, and Oliver says, "I've heard this story, and I'd like to have you come down to New York, so I can interview you and include you in my study." And I said, "Okay." So I went down one August day and spent the whole day with Oliver Sacks, which was absolutely incredible. And we talked about all of the stuff from the dream and the music and everything in between. And at the end of our meeting that day, now it's already evening, and as he's standing at the door, he looks at me, and honestly, it looked like he looked right through me. And he said to me, "The music from the dream went through an awful lot of trouble to get here. The least you can do is write it." And I thought, wow. And so I left and went home, and I was absolutely obsessed with getting it written. And I spent every day after work till 12, 1 o'clock in the morning, and I would try to take all those little pieces of paper that I had thrown information on and put it together into what I was hearing in my head. And the good thing was is that because it was always playing in my head the same way, I had an internal control. So whatever I tried to play in the piano, and if I tried to write it down, I would play it back to myself with one of the music programs called Sibelius. It's like writing music for dummies. And I would I would write the music, and then I would listen to it and compare it to what I had in my head. And so it always came out exactly the way it was supposed to. And it took me about 7 months of working nonstop with it, and I managed to get the piece written down, which I affectionately called the Lightning Sonata. But musically, it's what's called a fantasy in form, but you can subtitle it anything you want. So that's what it was subtitled. And so I got it all written down, and I wanted to play it for my music group in May of 2007. And so I did that, and I played the finished work for them. And while I was there, I got a call from Oliver. And he says, I was just wondering if it would be okay if I used your story in my book. And I said, sure, what could that hurt? And he said, good, because you're chapter one, and it's coming out in the New Yorker July of this year. And I thought, oh, okay. So suddenly things were going to take a bit of a turn. And of course, the New Yorker came out on July 23rd, I think it was, 2007. And suddenly the story that I had kind of put in the closet was out of the closet and then in everybody's front yard.
And that coincided with the publication with the music.
Yeah.
Having the story and the full piece, they were together. That was not on purpose, was it?
I'm sorry?
It was not on purpose.
It was what?
On purpose?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the music happened. You happened to finalize the writing.
Everything came together. Just
yes.
The way it's supposed to, which we have no control of, but the universe does. And so, the book came out shortly after that, and suddenly I was getting calls to play the music, and I had been contacted by a friend of mine at the State University of New York in Oneonta, who was he was the head of the music department there. And initially the phone call was, would you teach a class? And I thought, sure, that would be interesting. And then a week later it was, well, we've considered changing that. Maybe would you consider playing for the class? And I thought, okay. And then a week later it was, there's an awful lot of people interested in this. Would you consider doing a concert at the conservatory? And I thought, I've never played this in front of a group of people before other than friends, and I don't know that I'm up for that. And he said, you'll be fine. I'm like, yeah, right. And at that point, I called my music teacher, Sandy, and told her what I said I would do. And that was in October, I think, of 2007. And I had signed up to do this concert in January of 2008 on my birthday, no less. Kind of a rebirth.
That's another coincidence.
Yeah, there's plenty of those. And so she started working with me every day, and we would spend 3 or 4 hours, and everything from, you know, they put the piano on the stage, and I would have to walk out there and go through the motions of it, and then I would have to play, and she'd be up in the top row, and she'd go, "I can't hear you," and I'm like, okay. So it was an incredible experience just preparing for it, and then I finally got everything together, and it was all memorized and prepared, and by the time January came around, there were 3 television crews: the BBC One, Granada Media, and German National Television, who had somehow gotten wind of all of this, and they were going to be part of it. So, it went from could you teach a class to now you're doing a concert in front of 3 television studios, and I managed to do it, which I'm amazed at. Um, and I'm grateful that I was able to do it. I just want to turn that thing off, making a clicking sound. And and then it's just kind of taken on a life of its own ever since.
So what happens to music in your life now?
Now it's a bigger part. I have retired from active orthopedic surgery, and as of December of this past year, and I still work part time, but now my main focus is music, and I have lots of music that keeps coming to me, and I try to write it down, and it has it's grown in multiple directions.
What do you think of that experience? How was your life as a doctor before that happened to you? Okay. As a man of science, did you think of anything of that nature before?
Not really. I was a hardcore science person. I've got a PhD in physiology and cellular biophysics. I had all of my life had been involved in real science and research, and I didn't have much use for any of the hocus pocus parts of life that I didn't understand, and there was no label for. And suddenly I'm thrust right into it. And it was a big shock. And the other thing that happened was, I was very focused before this happened on I was going into academic orthopedic surgery, and I was publishing, and I was the chairman of a big spine meeting that met yearly, and so I was going down, a very rigorous scientific road, and suddenly it didn't matter at all. And after having gone through this, I realized, the things that are important, and the people, and the parts of life that I had discounted mattered the most. And so I just dropped out of all of that other stuff. I stopped worrying about publishing. I stopped doing the meeting. I took care of my, I spent a lot of time taking care of my patients, and it changed my view of the world completely. So, and people say that knew me before and knew me after said it was a big change.
What about language? Because doctors tend to have this belief right now that they must deliver hardcore diagnosis straight to the patient's face because they must deal with reality. Were you that kind of doctor? If you had a bad thing to say to a patient, would you just say it you know, like that?
I don't think that I was ever that hard, um, and because I've had lots of um, family traumas over the years, and wouldn't have appreciated somebody just delivering me bad news without a heart. And so, I don't think that I ever was like that, but afterwards, I was never like that. And afterwards, I knew what, and a lot of the people in the hospital knew this whole story. And, if they had somebody that was dying, they would have me come and talk to them. And it's like, you know, what's it going to be like? And it gave, at least I think it gave people some comfort in knowing that this was not something to be afraid of. This was something to rejoice in. And yes, it's going to change a lot of people's lives, um, but it's still going to continue on.
Did you get to train other doctors about it? How
Yeah,
to talk to people who
I
were
actually,
dying?
I've talked to many um, other doctors and nurses and and patients about all of this stuff. Um, but I've also taken part in training videos that have been sponsored by the IANDS, the International Association of Near Death Studies. And that's the big group that is trying to educate the rest of the world about near death and um, spiritually transformative experiences like that. So, it's starting to come out of the closet. I mean, we've done a couple of videos that are being distributed to medical schools, and they're just now starting to teach young doctors that this is an important issue that you have to deal with, and that your patients you're going to have to advise people on. So, things are changing.
How do they receive that kind of training?
It's only been in the past few years that it's even come out and been accepted. So what we're starting to see is that people, medical students are signing up for electives about this particular subject. So there's good reception. Does everyone come running and say, "I want to know about this"? No, but there's more and more um, really good information that's being brought out to the general public and to the medical community, and it's coming through people like me who have had near death experiences and are willing to talk about it. I'm I'm in a book um, that came out of the University of Missouri on the science of near death experiences, and it's a compendium of 10 different physicians who have all had near death experiences, and they've written about their cases and tried to provide some scientific explanation, and they also have some of the physicians who are opposed to it also offer their interpretation of what we all experience. So it's being talked about now, where 15 years ago it wasn't. In fact, when this happened, I was afraid to say anything to anybody because I thought somebody's going to call the state and tell them to take my license away because I'm a lunatic. So, and in the mid '90s, that was kind of the philosophy, and you had to be careful. And there just wasn't much written. In 1994, when I was struggling to understand what had happened, and I went to the literature thinking, well, somebody must have written something. I'll start looking the stuff up. And there was only one book. It was Ray Moody's book, and Daniel Brinkley, who had written a book called Saved by the Light, and he was struck by lightning, and he'd been dead for about 2 hours, and actually they were putting him in the morgue. The morgue attendant was getting ready to close the door in the freezer and saw the sheet move, and they ran him back to the emergency room, and they started all over again. But other than his book, there was nothing out there that talked about being struck by lightning and the near death and out of body experience and all that stuff.
How are the chances of surviving that kind of a?
Pretty slim.
Pretty slim. How is your body overall? How did you have any bad side effects?
Not that I know of. Oliver thought that I'd had some circuits rewired, and I can certainly agree with that. But and I've had some cardiac issues, but I don't know if I would have had them anyway.
What kind did you have a heart attack or anything?
No, I had an arrhythmia. And so the electrical system in my heart had malfunctioned, and certainly, if I
right after that.
No, that was in 2010, I think. So it's 15 years later, 16 years. But could I have had some electrical injury to the heart and not known it? Sure. I mean, it could have been there for a long period of time and evolved into something else. But
how did you get the motivation to go back to work in the healing system, in the healing? Let me rephrase that. Have you ever heard of this doctor called Grayson scale? Bruce Grayson.
I know Bruce well.
You know him well.
Yeah.
Have you done his scale?
I've done a lot of his studies.
You've been measured by him.
Yeah, he had contacted me early on, and to include me in all of those studies, and we've kept in touch over the years. In fact, I just saw him a couple of weeks ago, because the yearly meeting of the IANS conference was a few weeks ago, and I saw him there.
So what was his conclusion about your story? What did he say?
He has never said anything one way or the other than the fact that it's an incredible story. And but going to a conference like that where everyone believes with their whole being that what we're saying is the absolute truth, and probably 60% of them have all had some sort of a near-death experience. So there's great comfort in numbers, and everybody is on the same wavelength, so to speak.
What do you think music has this bigger weight now in your life?
I think that a large part of it is I know that on some level, I know that it's an important thing that I'm supposed to be doing. That there's something about the music that I don't understand and not supposed to understand, But I've had so many people who've come up to me after I've played, and they talk about feeling things or seeing visions. Um, and I've even had people come and lay on the floor underneath the piano to feel the vibration of the music. So there are things about this music that don't necessarily make sense, and I'm the first one to admit that it's a music that's very powerful and meaningful, but I don't understand it all yet, and I'm still working on it. But
So you think it's a healing music?
I think there's something healing about it, and I think that we're too ignorant yet to really understand um, how all of that works.
So music might be more powerful than medicine in the future.
Very much. I mean, it's you know, music is something that's very primitive to the brain and is incredible. And to give you an example, one of the things that Oliver Sacks did was he did an experiment with, and Alan Yentob, who was the head of the BBC One, um, took part in this with him. And what they did was they took three types of music that they didn't like, music that they liked, and music that they absolutely loved and resonated with. And they put that music on, and they had functional MRI imaging done of their brains under each circumstance. And what was interesting was they both had the same response, is that music that they didn't like, the brain didn't react to. And by reacting to, the brain would turn red on the scan if it reacted to it. And so nothing happened with the music they didn't like. With music that they liked, you saw patches of red. And I saw this whole experiment happen. And so there were patches that turned red. And then when they listened to music that they absolutely loved, the entire brain from wall to wall turned red. And I remember looking at the radiologists who were standing there watching this, and their mouths were open. They were just standing there dumbfounded because the brain doesn't do things like that. The brain likes to segregate things like speech is here, visions over there, feelings here, thoughts over there, and it doesn't allow anything to cross all barriers except music. And and so what did it mean? Nobody knows. But the fact that music is that powerful and commands that much respect within the human body and the brain, there's something very primitive about music and the way we're made. But we don't have any answers yet.
Do you think you have become a better person?
I think I am. Um, I think I'm much more in tune with people's emotional responses to things and the way that they feel, than I was before all this happened. Um, and I think I'm much more spiritual, and but probably less religious, because I grew up as a Catholic, and in the Catholic religion, there's no such thing as reincarnation, and all the spiritual mumbo jumbo doesn't exist. So we parted ways in that respect. But I'm absolutely convinced of a higher power and that God exists, um, but not in the way that the church insisted that it was.
How has that changed your personal life? If
Yeah, I don't feel. compelled to go to church. Um, my my religion is within me, and so when I want to talk to God and my angels and whoever else is listening, I feel at ease with just doing that. I don't have to be in any special place to do it.
Do you meditate or anything?
I have tried to do meditating, and I have not been very disciplined about it. And you do have to be for to make real progress with it. But that's high on my list of things to accomplish.
Isn't the music you do already a form of meditation?
Yes, yeah, it takes me to a place that I could not get to otherwise.
Thank you.
Oh, you're absolutely welcome. Thank you for asking.
Ah, last time I had this horrible thing with my computer, I lost three big interviews, and I really stopped doing interviews for a long time because of that. Do you know Dr. Party?
Yeah.
Harvey?
Yep.
Yeah, I lost his interview as well.
Oh my God. And he's a hard guy to nail down. He's a hard person to get the time to do anything with.
So do you know all of them? Do you know every every doctor who's been through a
I
similar experience?
I know most of the people who are involved in any of this sort of brain work or near death experiences.
How do you view medical researchers? If I understood, they are far from what really goes on here. So how can is it possible to get them two together?
It's going to be difficult. There's an old saying that science advances one death at a time, and that means that science is so difficult to move ahead that the people who espouse a certain concept actually have to die before people will let go of that. It almost becomes a religion, and that's very unfortunate about science. And I think that the people who, in the experimental design of some of these things, a lot of the papers that I've read, they make giant leaps of, well, this electrical activity in the brain that happened 30 seconds after death is what's responsible for a near-death experience. And it's like, no, it has nothing to do with it. I mean, you're looking at apples and oranges, and but they're trying to make these incredible inferences on very little data, and I think it's poorly understood data. So, you know, I don't have a lot of use for a lot of the basic science that's being done from people that don't understand what this really is.
Have you published any papers on your experience?
Yes, in it was in a Missouri Medical Journal. I published the whole experience, and I went into a lot of detail about what current scientific studies there were, and how I felt that they were missing the point.
How was it uh, accepted,
No,
received?
I mean, I thought it was received well. It got that's the that's an article that got put into a book about the science of near death studies. Uh, John
Okay.
John Hagen put that together.
Do you still get downloads of other things
Yeah,
besides music?
I still the music still comes, and I'm working on writing a book. That's one of my things for this year. Uh, and a lot of
What's
the
the book about?
information. I'm sorry.
What's the book about?
Um, I'm trying to. write a book about that includes my near-death experience and what I think it means, and tying it together with quantum physics, where there's a lot of research that's being done about um, what we think is a spiritual reality, and also with some of the um, ancient societies and or civilizations um, that have come before us. So there's a lot of information out there, and it's not really organized in a way that you can take everything and put it together. But I
Do you
think
think do you think you get parts of the book downloaded to you?
I get not as much as with the music. The music seems to download in a clearer way. Um, the book tends to be more of I get pushed in a direction with it, and I'll start to write something, and the writing just comes. But is it coming from me, or is it coming from assistants? I often wonder that.
What else? People, about people. Do you get to know about feelings about people? You know when they are had bad intentions and good intentions.
I get some of that. I can usually tell pretty clearly, um, but I think that we all have that.
Yes, but
Uh,
you had a light
yeah,
lightning through your body to
yeah.
expand a
It's
bit more than
not a
the
great
rest
way
of
to
us.
get it, but I certainly do have um, greater intuition than I ever had before.
Did you use that in patients when you were working?
I used it all the time because I could sense what was wrong with someone, and then I can feel somebody's aura. I can't see it. Um, I've only seen it a couple of times, but I can feel it. And when
Use in your hands or just
my hands, I can feel, if somebody is right here, and I can come from a distance away and feel the electrical energy on my hands. And if there is something wrong, then there's a disturbance in the electrical field, and it feels like static electricity. And so I can feel that. Sometimes it's very uncomfortable for people when I feel, when I can feel that. They're also feeling it too, but and sometimes it's very painful.
do you
So
get electrocuted sometimes when you walk by metal handrails?
I get static shocks. You mean, like static electricity? Yeah.
Yeah, something like that.
Get that. It's very uncomfortable for me to walk outside in a lightning storm. It's absolutely frightening because I can feel the electrical charge build in the ground, um, where the lightning may come, and that's what happens. There's a charge that builds in the ground, and then the charge in the clouds discharges to that spot, and I can feel that, which is it's very unsettling. So I don't go outside. And if there's a storm, it's great to watch, but I'm going to stay the hell in the house.
Thank you very much. Have you been to London many times?
I have actually. I worked in 1999. I was on a traveling fellowship, and I worked in Exeter.
Wow, yeah. I've
Uh,
never been there.
I stayed in London and worked in Exeter, and I have a number of colleagues that are over there that I've kept in touch with over the years, and I've done some scientific work with. So it's pretty neat.
Well, you might come again. So next time you come, let's have coffee
Oh,
somewhere.
very good.
Okay. So thank you very much again.
Oh, you're very
And
welcome.
yeah.
And I'm sorry
And
I kept you up so late.
I might now. I sleep really late. I sleep really late. I mean, I like to stay awake at night. I'm more productive. So
I understand. Alrighty.
the same way. Okay.
Very good.
Okay. Bye bye.
Have a
I'll
good night.
let you go. Thank you
Thank
again. Bye bye.